with the extreme heat, we thought that we could talk about safety in the garden. Take time to take care of yourself. Think about when you should be gardening. Think about the time of day. The temperatures are always going to be cooler earliest in the morning or later in the evening. And so try to avoid the peak time of day where that sun is just blazing hot and the temperatures are maxed out. So try to always choose early or late. On clothing, definitely try to always pick lighter colored clothes. And I know there's a lot of people out there that I'm friends with in the gardening world that are very sensitive to the sun, and they choose to have long sleeve shirts and long pants on. Now, I'm hot natured, so it's like, oh, I couldn't stand that. But I still try to take my precautions by covering up a little. Also, have a wide brimmed hat. That way, you're covering your face really well from the sun. Consider sunglasses to protect your eyes. And don't forget that sunscreen. I know there's a lot of people that think, oh, I don't have to worry about the sunscreen. I tan really well. Be careful. Still take those precautions. SPF 45 or above is what they recommend. More is better in terms of that number. The greater the number, the greater the protection. So don't forget to use that sunscreen. The other suggestion I have is work smarter. Brief tasks. Don't spend an hour on something. Try to limit your time to outdoors, maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then try to take a break. Pace yourself. I know my mother's biggest comment has always been about me that I go everything gangbusters, fast, hard, trying to get it done in a timely manner. Well, I'm bad about not pacing myself. And so the other day when it was starting to get really hot, I kept telling myself in the back of my head, slow down, pace yourself, take it easy. And that is my advice for anybody. Switch tasks often, and that way your muscles don't fatigue, your muscles, our bodies don't work as well in this high heat. So just give it a break. Take breaks, and I can't emphasize that enough. 15 minutes, take a break. And you don't have to go inside. I know a lot of people say, well, I don't want to go indoors because that's going to spoil me. Just find you a shade tree or step inside the garage if it's cooler, or somewhere where you can just take a break. It doesn't always mean that you have to go indoors, but take it slow, take a break. Hydrate. Most of us do not drink enough water, especially when we get outside and we get going. We don't want to take that break and go inside and get a drink. If you don't want to do that, take a jug with you, ice it down, or get a bottle that's insulated, ice it down, and that way you have something nice and cool. I do know there's a lot of people that don't like a lot of ice. It's okay. If they want to drink lukewarm water, that's great. If they want to drink cool water, just the main focus is hydrate. And if you don't like water, flavor it, and know when to quit. I know this is one thing I have had to learn because I just get so hot. I don't deal well with the heat. So I have to know when to quit. And that's where I go back to setting those time limits. So I know that, hey, I need to take that 10-minute break. Know what signs there are for heat stress and heat exhaustion. Know your body and listen to what it tells you. Definitely. If you get out there and in 10 minutes you're lightheaded and you're feeling pretty weak, take a break, get inside. Don't risk it. If nauseous, headache, confusion, think about maybe taking a longer break. And then, of course, if you start having problems with the muscle cramps, excessive sweating, irritability, it might be time to start thinking, well, do I need to contact someone, tell them that I'm not doing so hot? That way they can check on me. And remember, it doesn't take much to go from heat exhaustion to heat stroke. And the image to the right just sort of gives you an idea. When you quit sweating, when you start noticing that your skin is hot and dry, start thinking about getting some help. And that way you do not lose consciousness and you're beyond help. So definitely take care of yourself. Now, let's switch gears. Let's talk about plants. The biggest thing in protecting our plants from the extreme heat is water wisely. We always try to encourage water seldom, but water thoroughly. Pat talked about the evapotranspiration loss being 3/4 of an inch. That is a lot. So we really need to take a look at our watering. Keep an eye on those plants, especially the ones you hold near and dear to your heart. But once again, water seldom but thoroughly. And if that means going out and spending 30 minutes watering one day every 2 or 3 days, it's better than watering a little bit each day. What happens when we water a little bit each day is, one, it could be all running off and not absorbing in, or it can be creating a situation where plants are going to start root rotting because it's actually too much water. I know a lot of people say, but it's wilting. Yes, it can be a sign of too dry, but it can also be a sign of overwatering where the roots have deteriorated so much they can't pick up that moisture, but the plant is still wet. And so that's one thing I always try to tell people is figure out or learn what dry means or what it looks like. Lifting on a pot, is it lightweight or is it heavy? Let me stick my finger in the soil and dig around. Try to look at the soil. Is it dark brown, indicating that, almost black, that it's indicating wet, or is it a light brown? So learn in your garden and in your microclimates what that dry means and what it looks like, because sometimes it does not look or feel the same across the board. It's always best to try to have a direct placement of water, which means that you're putting the water next to that root system or right there at the base of the plant. We can do a lot of damage when we're doing aerial watering or overhead watering. And so really we like to see people place it at the ground level. And so we look at drip emitters, we look at soaker hoses. I love soaker hoses because you can walk away 15, 20 minutes, depending on your water pressure, you can have a pretty good soaking. If you link too many together, it may take you up to 2 hours to water. Just remember, it depends on that water pressure and it depends on how long you make those links of hoses. It's not completely bad if you do the aerial or the overhead watering. If that's all you got, then do it. Just remember to do it early enough in the evening that your foliage is going to dry, because you don't want to put your foliage away wet. You don't want to put the plants to bed wet. So think about that timing on the watering, because usually what we try to encourage is early morning or later in the evening. And there are lots of different tips and techniques out there online for watering. I know people that poke holes in milk jugs. They use PVC pipes shoved down in the ground. Lots of different ways to slow that watering down so it actually absorbs into the soil. I know I've been known to take a 5-gallon bucket, poke a couple holes in the bottom, and then set those holes to the base of the plant, fill it halfway up. And then that way the water drips out or trickles out very slowly. And the big thing is we don't want the runoff. We want that water to actually soak in. And think about those plants' water needs. Their different plants have different needs. And so you may not be able to water things across the board. I know I have 2 planters out in front of my office. One is drying out every day. The other is staying wet, and it only needs to be watered every 3 to 4 days. So it's good to notice those differences, because even in the ground, even with the different plant species, vegetables versus flowers versus trees, everything has a different need. Add a layer of mulch. 3 to 4 inches of mulch can really do a lot of good for plants. Just don't add it when it's bone dry. You want to make sure things are watered and then add the mulch, so then it conserves that moisture and it can regulate those temperatures because it has enough moisture in the ground. And the other thing I love is it prevents the weeds. Organic choices are always best, but mulch with whatever you have. I've even been known as taking large sheets of cardboard and putting them down on the ground, blocking them down, and that way there's not as much transpiration loss coming out of that ground. Think about hardwood bark, pine needles, straw, leaves, shredded paper, any of that stuff, grass clippings can work as a mulch. So you don't necessarily have to buy things, but just look around and see what you have available. Also, if you notice that your plants are starting to stress really well, you might consider shading those young plants. I know I have master gardeners that use old umbrellas, shade cloth. They can go get the shade cloth like what you would put on a dog kennel, and they drape it over some cage wire or some hoops. You can use arbors, trellises, benches. If you have a couple garden benches, just slip them over the plants that are starting to have trouble for that little bit of shade that it might provide. Also think about row covers. It's that white, light spun bound material that they use to keep insects off of our plants. Well, it can also help with shading. So you can find that at a lot of different garden centers and nurseries. So just buying a couple packages of those might also help. And if you don't want to go invest a lot of money, then you can actually use light colored sheets also. The big whole point of this is trying to get a little bit of shade to relieve those plants because they do stress when those temperatures get so high. And other tips I might just mention is caution when weeding, because anytime you weed, you're disrupting the soil. Anytime you're disrupting the soil, you are providing opportunity for more evaporational loss. And so just keep that in mind. I'm not saying don't weed, just find a different method of weeding other than cultivating the ground. Fertilize when moist. If we're in a dry period and you haven't watered in a while, do not add fertilizer because those plants will be injured. And so always fertilize when moist. If something is wilted, do not fertilize it. Very important. And then, of course, moisten the soil prior to any seeding that you might do by a couple of days. And that way you have plenty of ground moisture to get those seeds up out of the ground. And of course, if you're doing any seeding, make sure to put a thin layer of mulch or straw over the seeds. And I'm even knowing people to take a board and put over the seed for a couple of days to get it to start to germinate. And then they pull that board off. So lots of different tips and good information on how to keep us more comfortable as well as the plants.